Hi, this is Ren.
This is Casey.
And this is All Walks of Film. Welcome back, guys. We've been away for a while, but we decided to come back with a double feature. We saw the Merry double feature today.
For a Merry Christmas.
Yes, it was a very Merry Christmas. We saw Mary Queen of Scots, and then we saw Mary Poppins Returns. Two very different films, I might say. You know, one's R, the other's PG, and one's a period piece.
One is also a period piece.
And
in
one
a
is
manner of speaking.
And one is a fantasy, and the other one
doesn't really quite count as a period piece in any way. Yeah.
Yeah, and one is kind of a fantasy of a period piece, but we'll get into that a little bit more. All right.
And spoilers, I will be talking a lot about art in these movies, because that's all I think about in movies anymore. I've been thinking about doing video essays dedicated solely to, like, the production design and costuming of movies as they come out.
I think that would be really good and really insightful, because
not a lot of people talk about that. They talk about, like, the script and the acting and the editing. Like, those are all pretty popular things to talk about, but the art, in a certain sense, like, not always, but there are a lot of movies where the art can make or break a movie. That does happen. Quiet Place is actually a really good example of really good work all around, except for the art department fucking shit up. Totally unrelated.
Just segue? What do you mean?
Okay, slight rant. So the script is really, really tight. The editing is, like, very refined. A lot of the character development is really strong. And then you had these people in set deck who felt like they had to spell everything out on a poster board for you, or on a dry erase board for you, in a way that nobody would ever write stuff down. Just so that way then you could have, like, this super clear stuff. Or, you know, a lot of the stuff in the storytelling totally worked, except for the fact they had newspapers saying, oh, they based on hearing. There would be no newspapers to print that stuff. That would not happen, especially not on the day of the internet on your phone, that kind of thing. There's just so many dumb things like that were kind of really hurt the movie in stupid ways that a lot of the other departments in the movie were really on top of.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could make the argument that the newspaper presses were kind of like the waterfall, where it's like enough consistent noise.
And who's delivering those papers? How are they getting out to people? Who's saving that? Does John Krasinski really need a reminder in his basement? Oh yeah, by the way, the monsters hunt by hearing. Like, the rest of the movie is so much smarter than that, and then the set deck just had to mess it up. Now, it could have been written into the script or something, but, like, as an example. I don't want to focus on a bad example, though, because there's a lot of really, really great art in movies.
Alright, so the first movie that we're going to get into is the first movie that we saw today, and that is Mary Queen of Scots.
I was definitely really excited to see this movie.
I was too. Based on the trailers, it looked like an interesting take on the story of Queen Mary, Bloody Mary, etc., which was funny because, like, I know the story, but, like, I forgot that she was from Scotland, so, like, those two things didn't, like, sync together, and, like, we went to the Alamo Drafthouse to watch it, and I saw one of the first films ever with special effects made by...
It is the first special effect ever put on film.
Which is Mary getting her head chopped off. And quite frankly, it's pretty good. You know?
It's not bad.
For its time, it's
For
pretty good.
being the very first ever, yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah. But that being said, I was excited. Saoirse Ronan's kind of like a hit or miss actress for me, but she looked really good in it, and I was really excited for Margot Robbie, who gets really sidelined in the movie.
Yeah, this was definitely a Godzilla situation where they really marketed the movie very, very heavily on the rivalry between Mary Stuart and Queen Elizabeth. And that's not at all where the movie tried to go. Primarily because Queen Elizabeth is not in it much, but secondarily, it was not written as a rivalry for the most part.
Yeah, it was written as men are the problem, and the reason why this union couldn't work
was solely due to the interference from men.
Yeah,
which is a bad idea. Like, that's just bad writing.
It also takes away the agency of the women involved and makes them weaker than what they actually were, or I would perceive they were in real life. Like,
I mean, you can't really just outright dismiss a lot of the social and political problems that A, handcuff any ruler, but explicitly handcuff women. Like, come on.
Yeah, like, there were some throwaway lines in the movie that I was expecting to be major parts of the movie because, like, you know, the trailers... You know, I shouldn't judge a movie based on its trailers, but...
I mean, yeah, you should. That's why they exist.
Okay.
To a certain extent, what is the purpose of having a trailer so you can judge whether or not you think a movie is worth watching?
Right. But it led me into thinking that there was going to be more conflict with that. And while it is present in the story, I feel that it's not emphasized enough. Also, this movie had a really weird idea of wokeness, like trying to rewrite history in a way that's less hashtag problematic, that I found, like, while watching it, like, okay, first up, it's not about the racial depictions of the characters, because if you actually go back and look at some of the artwork of historical figures during that time, you will see more black people than you'll ever see in movies. That's one thing that I actually compliment the movie for having.
I mean, yes and no. Like, it's not the fact that there are people of color in the movie, it's more of their role in the movie. Like, the most prominent black guy is promiscuous. Like, and that is his one big defining trait. Is that he really, really wants to fuck a woman who's not his wife. That's, like, his most important part of the story. Maybe you shouldn't have done that for woke points. Maybe that was a bad idea.
Also, like, let's talk... We'll get into some of the other stuff, but right now we're just talking about, like, some of its, like, wokeness thing. The really interesting yet problematic LGBTQ stuff in the movie.
Yeah, that was the big thing. That was really weird.
Like, there was a scene in the movie where they were like, oh, you know, Mary Queen of Scots, she's, like, so, like, progressive and, like, even, like, pro-trans and stuff. And it just, like, that scene felt a little forced to me. Especially how, like, everybody else seemed to dismiss it as, like, not something that big.
I mean, I entirely disagree with you. I thought that particular one scene was actually totally fine. It makes sense to me. It works for the characters. There have always been trans people in history. They've just been viewed from different lenses and perspective. Including a trans character in your movie really isn't that big a deal if you get into it. And with his character, it kind of wasn't really a thing. So that was kind of an issue, just the way that they presented it. But more importantly, I kind of thought it was weird how they were trying to get into, like, is Queen Elizabeth trans? And also, is Mary Queen of Scots a lesbian? Maybe she should have just been a lesbian and that would have really helped her out. And it was just kind of like, dude, whoa. Either go there or don't go there. One or the other, please. And... like, that sounds weird, but then there is also the thing of, like, okay, so you've got a trans character in there who's more or less, like, he's okay, he's fine, he's a good guy. But then you have a gay character who's, like, the evil, slimy snake in the grass, just, like, complete asshole, rapist, all this other stuff. Like, every evil thing you could possibly put into a male character, plus he's gay, and it's just like, oh, man.
Plus he's an incompetent drunkard.
Like, it's literally every bad stereotype about guys, plus he's gay, and it's just like, oh,
yeah.
Why? Why did you have to do that? And, like, the only reason why he's a minstrel, right? Like, that's his position in court.
I'm sorry, I don't know.
Okay, well, musician character, I guess I should say. Because with this movie, it's hard to identify what him or her, what preferred gender pronoun would be, because that wasn't a thing back then, and it's not addressed, it's not made clear in the movie. But the only reason why that character is interested in having sex with men in the term of the movie is explicitly just to unveil how evil the gay male character is.
So they do that with the guys, but then they turn both Queen Elizabeth and Queen Mary into essentially victims of circumstance.
Well, they're both perfectly innocent and flawless from beginning to end of the movie. They were both wholly innocent of any possible problems, any moral quandaries. There's no ambiguity. They're both wholly innocent and pious because they are women and women should run the world. Yes, queen. It makes for a very uninteresting movie above all else. Having, like, perfect protagonists is always going to be a little bit more dull. But also, like, historical dramas generally are not very historically accurate. And when it comes to this stuff, you can't really be historically accurate because you'll never know for sure. If you ever bring up the fact that, like, anything having to do with who is Queen Elizabeth fucking, you're never going to be historically accurate because we don't know for sure. And also, as a side note, I was hoping this would be the one movie that wasn't about who was Queen Elizabeth fucking, but at least in this movie, it does tie into the plot for Mary, Queen of Scots, so that's more acceptable than most films, but whatever. So I get that it's not going to be wholly historically accurate, and to a certain extent, in order to tell your movie, that can be okay. But with stuff like, well, did she kill her second husband, or didn't she? Well, in this movie, no, she is entirely innocent. She explicitly said, we're not gonna do that. She had nothing to do with his death whatsoever. It is entirely not her fault. It's stupid, bad, evil men. She never makes a bad rule as a queen. She never... Like, the one bad thing she did was she was seduced by the evil man into marrying him. Multiple times. But that's not really presented as a character flaw in her. It's more of, oh, the evil men. Like, it's always the evil men doing bad things to her, and that is why anything bad ever happened to Mary, Queen of Scots. And it's like, dude, being a ruler is not like that. At least with Queen Elizabeth, there's a little bit more of, like, push and pull of her wanting to do what morally she thinks is right versus what she has to do with her responsibility as queen. At least there was a conflict in there for maybe a grand total of 30 seconds of screen time in this 2.5 hour movie. But
yeah,
that's definitely not explored very much.
I will say, based on the marketing, it felt like there was going to be a lot more screen time with the two of them, and we only get one moment with them, which is fine, but I would have liked to see more parallels, and it seemed like the movie didn't really want to go there. It was mostly centered around...
Because the more you get into their relationship, the less you can be like, oh, see, wouldn't it have just been great if all the men got out of their way and let them rule together?
Well, this has been a problem that I've been seeing in a lot of films that have come out this year. Movies centered around female characters, where the female characters are somehow sidelined by the men in the film.
Yeah, this movie wasn't nearly as bad in that regard as some other ones. Like, Roma was truly objectionable in that regard, where your entire movie is about this woman, and you take every opportunity in terms of your writing, in terms of your dialogue, in terms of your camera work, to obfuscate her and push her as far off into the sideline as you possibly can with a protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no real... To me, there's no real excuse for that. That's just bad writing. That was just bad storytelling. And in this movie, it does kind of... A lot of those problems shine through. I want to make a point, though. The director and the screenwriter are two separate people. And I think the direction, in general, was pretty good. I was actually pretty impressed, especially because this is another directorial debut, I think, for first time. I don't remember her surname, but the director, I think she did a really good job. a lot of these issues with the story and the character lie very heavily in the screenwriting, and the script is where a lot of the story falls apart. A lot of the problems with it being dull, with it not really adhering to the more interesting parts of the history of Mary or Elizabeth, or the problems between England and Scotland. Josie Rourke is her name.
Yeah, she's mostly known for doing live cinema broadcasts of stage plays.
Yeah, so this is her first true form directorial film. And I think that on that element, for the most part, she did a really, really excellent job. But I think the script is where a lot of the problems with the story and the characters really falls apart.
And the scriptwriter, I know he worked on House of Cards. So he hasn't done much. He did The Ides of March, the first TV show, and 23 episodes of House of... 23 episodes of House of Cards.
Yeah.
So...
he doesn't have a whole lot of work under his belt. In particular, his writing is mostly based on the writings of other people.
Right. Now, what I will say is, based on his filmography so far, he should have been able to write a more intriguing political drama.
Yeah, I agree. That's one of the big things is, there is more politics in this story than there generally are in a lot of female-centric historical dramas, because a lot of female-centric historical pieces, like period pieces, very unfortunately, they tend to do this thing where they're in a really interesting time in history, and they have a really interesting political text to go over, and they're... women's place in history tends to be, like, really, really interesting in those stories, and then it gets sidelined for a love triangle, like, how can I fuck around behind my husband's back kind of backstory, which is really unfortunate, and it's rarely done well. Not never, but rarely. And at least in this movie, it wasn't exactly that. Like, the politics were actually... I mean, they were very simplistically discussed, but they were discussed and were kept in the mix from the beginning to the end of the movie. Right. Until it got to the point where it was like, okay, we kind of have to fast forward 12 to 15 years and kind of go over a lot of the stuff that led to Mary Queen of Scots dying, so we can get to a point where we show, oh yeah, she was executed because that's noteworthy.
Yeah, and that was the weirdest thing about the movie.
It was so bad. Why would you write it that way?
It was so weird because it was like, all these moments like lead up to something, and then it's like, oh, by the way, that she's like in jail and then she's executed. And like, it's one of those things where it's like, maybe like spend like 3 minutes doing a montage just to show like the grueling, like just being...
what it's like for her to live in hiding,
right,
that kind of thing.
And all that kind of stuff, because like, yeah, especially like in hiding, like you took some of the most interesting aspects and just threw them away because I don't even know why. Like that seems to be like, your high drama, your awards-worthy moments. And like there is that one moment where you have Margot Robbie sobbing because of her having to kill Mary.
Her sister.
Yeah,
her sister, which by the way, that storyline did not work the way it was written in the script.
But I will say that performance in that moment of her then trying to compose herself was very well done.
She can always save her shitty performance in a shitty movie by crying and trying to compose herself. I wouldn't call Mary Queen of Scots shitty, but that is literally exactly what she did in Suicide Squad as well. Like, she's wearing way too much white face makeup, and her story makes no sense, but then she has the scene where she has to cry over somebody who she thinks she's killed, and then she has to compose herself for the public.
Yeah.
That's a very specific niche to get yourself into, but she makes it work.
So since you mentioned it before, I think now we should get into production and costume design for this film.
I actually had a few more issues with the script.
Okay.
one of the big problems, well, there are two big problems with the storytelling. If you kind of push aside the huge pile of men are garbage, I drink male tears, hashtag kill all men nonsense that's going on in this movie. If you push all of that to the side, there's still three major underlying problems. As I said, Mary is just too perfect. It's obnoxious, and you can't relate to it that well. Two, Elizabeth is not very well developed, which is really sad, because there are hints of more interesting things going on with her. The thing of how she's more of a man than a woman, and what does that mean, and she kind of wants to have kids, but she doesn't want to be married. Like, all of those things were really interesting. The big reason why I'm kind of more opposed to them in the movie is that they're kind of pushed in there bluntly and entirely dropped. It's not that introducing those things in the movie is a bad idea, it's just do something with it. They also brought in this thing of her going mad, which, her makeup was killing her. That makes sense. How she has, like, these bouts of madness. But then, when she meets Mary, she's all tied up into all of this. She's not crazy. It's something like that. It's not political jealousy. It's, I was the evil queen in Snow White, and I was just always so jealous of how pretty you were, even back when I was young and pretty before I had ugly pockmarks and had to hide my face and all this nonsense. I was just so jealous of your beauty because you were everything that I couldn't be. And then I was jealous because you were a mommy and I wasn't. Dude, seriously?
I will say that...
Why is this a thing?
The moment that they visually showed this, now they shoved it down our throats after this, but the moment that they visually showed it was very good. I like that thing of seeing the ephemeral blood all over the bed, and then her, like, roses, like, in between her legs. Yes, it is heavy-handed, but I did like the visual.
That was actually, again, that's a really nice touch that came most likely from the director.
But it's, that's one of those moments where it's like, okay, we get it, so, like, put the other stuff in because we have time.
Yeah, I agree with you. But then the third big problem is the relationship between Mary and Elizabeth makes no goddamn sense. Explicitly the way it's developed in this movie. I'm not talking about historically, I'm not talking about if you have a lot of knowledge and you come into this. I mean, if you don't know anything and you watch this movie, the way that they go from, we hate each other, we're foes, we have to stop each other, no, we're not even cousins, we're sisters, we love each other so much, even though we rarely speak to each other. We go years at a time without corresponding. We're not close to one another, but all of a sudden, overnight, we're gonna be best friends, we're gonna be soul sisters before we've even met each other, and then we're gonna meet each other once, and then, like, once they met each other, the dynamic is really bizarre, because at that point it's established, okay, we're, like, sisters because we're so close. We're not even, like, cousins anymore. We're not even foes because that's what the men wanted us to do. But then they are still kind of foes. Like, you can play it both ways if you develop it right, but they didn't. It was just, oh, and by the way, Mary's gonna stomp all over you and talk about how inferior, or how superior she is to you. And you're just gonna take it and still protect her and it's fine. And that totally had nothing to do with the reason why you tried to have her executed. And also, Mary probably totally was not trying to kill you anyway.
The biggest thing that frustrates me is you take the agency out of the women. And I think that's not fair to the importance of these characters. It seems like it's so much more interesting to actually make them more human, more flawed. I mean, it's this idea of martyrdom that they mention in the movie that they don't...
literally mention in the last 30 seconds of the movie as a passing thought.
Yeah, even though, like, the whole movie essentially is doing that to both of them. Mm-hmm. Which is really weird. Like, at a certain point, you have to pick a side, especially when it's, like, a rivalry like this, except...
It wasn't a rivalry, apparently.
Right. But I'm saying, like, that would have been so much more interesting to actually have this relationship form and the relationship fall apart. That seems much more compelling than just saying, like, you know, it was the men in the situation that didn't want to bow down to women, which was very heavily thrown in the movie. Like, you know, you had it with the brother who, like, joins the rebellion to fight against his sister's army and then apologizes to her and is like, oh my god, and you forgive me for all this? And, like, that's kind of interesting, but then the movie doesn't really go anywhere after that.
Well, and then 2 minutes later, he stabs her in the back again, and then it's never resolved. And it's like, okay, what happened with you to make you switch back and forth like that? Because at least with the half-brother, the impression wasn't given that he was being intentionally duplicitous. It was that he actually had some internal struggles of wanting to do what he thought was right to protect the people of Scotland, who were notably absent in this movie, considering how much they were being talked about the whole damn time, versus, you know, wanting to be with his sister. You could have done some real, like, Prince of Egypt, like, good quality development there, but you didn't. There was a lot of that in this movie. You could have done something, but you didn't. But I will say, the performances were all really good. Okay. It wasn't enough to save the movie in my mind. Like, a good performance in a bad movie is still going to be a bad movie. Meryl Streep can give one good speech in the post. That doesn't mean that the post is really worth anything besides just, you know, garbage propaganda.
Well, in that movie, sidelined its most important character, Daniel Ellsberg.
Mm-hmm.
As well as, like, the people actually, like, working on the paper, which I get, most of them were men. Some of them were women
who were doing more than Meryl Streep was.
Yeah, exactly. But that being said, let's get into the makeup, production design, and overall art direction of this film.
Okay, well, starting with hair and makeup, it kills me because it will be nominated for an Oscar for makeup because Queen Elizabeth's makeup, the makeup for Margot Robbie, was phenomenal from beginning to end. The prosthetic on her nose was fantastic. The blemishes in her skin were spot on. The special effects for when she has the pox and she's like all bloody and scabby and she has pox on her eyelids that are keeping them half shut. So good. And then her scarred skin after the whole thing with the pox. And then
you could like see it through the makeup.
The makeup to make her look older. The caked on makeup that looks great at a distance but looks garbage close up. All in a good way. In like a specific intentional way. She was phenomenal. Her makeup was amazing. And then you had Saoirse Ronan, who has very, very little makeup except for a disturbing amount of eyeliner throughout the film. And then at the end of the movie, when she is supposed to be almost 40, the movie, I was doing the math in my head based on what they said in the movie, she was 38. And essentially what they did to age her up was they took the makeup that I have sitting under my sink right now and did their best.
Yeah, they tried to elongate some of her features.
Like, they tried to make her cheekbones a little bit more pronounced, so her cheeks seemed a little bit more sallow, and they tried to, like, exaggerate some of the folds in her neck to make her look a little older. But also, she still looked like she was 18. Like, she still looked like a Saoirse Ronan.
Which is also crazy because, like, you think, especially given the time period, you don't just get executed. There's usually a long period where you're in jail, which...
She was in jail!
They did show, and somehow she looks fucking gorgeous before...
perfect.
Okay, what was the rip away with the dress, and then the red dress that appeared? I mean, it was like something out of
it turned into Magic Mike for a second.
Yeah, like it was...
Like, the rip away was so cleanly done. I'm not an expert. I'm not sure if that was a thing or not. I haven't heard of it, but that doesn't mean it's wrong or inaccurate or anything. But it was definitely a little odd just how clean that rip away was. That being said, a lot of the costuming was a little too cute. The design work is based on history, but a lot of it was more on the side of cute and fashionable over just atrocious and horrible to wear. Queen Elizabeth had like one good costume where it looked like she was a fucking prisoner in her own body. That was really good. It's the last costume you see her wear in the whole film where it looks like seriously uncomfortable. But considering that like one of the prevalent themes over sisterhood, good, men, evil, is about the boundaries and constraints on women in power, you would think that would be especially prevalent in the costumes, but no,
the
like
costumes
makeup
felt really masculinized,
which is not a bad thing.
I get that they're like trying to make it like more comfortable and stuff like that, but like the problem that I had watching the film was I kept on thinking, is this accurate? Does this feel accurate? And that's one of those things where I hate to admit, but I don't exactly know, but it didn't feel accurate.
Yeah, and that's kind of where a lot of the stuff with historical fiction kind of has to walk the line of what feels right and also what is accurate.
Also, those guys had like way too clean clothes throughout. It was like they were wearing the most pristine leather and the most pristine bags and all this kind of stuff, and like some of the stitch work and stuff like that looked like it was sewn on by a machine, and there was
a real lack of texture in the film that really good historical pieces will provide to you, because yes, they're rich and they're the top of the top and you're talking about like the ruling class, but you're also talking about a time period that had the most garbage hygiene in human history. And there were some things that were pretty okay about it, like the fact that Mary is in the bathtub being washed in a dressing gown. Yeah, that's actually pretty accurate. People, A, rarely bathed, and B, when they did, they normally were still wearing clothes, so they weren't like getting very clean when they bathed. But like everyone was like very powder fresh and attractive and in perfect clothes and in perfect hygiene, except for poor Queen Elizabeth. Her only thing is that she got the pox, nothing else. But like the thing where it's like, oh, nobody wears makeup because that's not a social norm that's put on them. Nobody's wearing constrictive clothing because that's a social norm that's put on them. Like, come on, really?
And I've mentioned this to you a couple times with films, and I don't necessarily know the accuracy of this, but there are many films that show women on horses, especially in period pieces where they're not riding side saddle. I don't necessarily know how historically accurate that is. Now, if somebody does know, and if that is more historically accurate, and then there are certain pockets of time where women would
places,
right, where women would most likely sit side saddle. Now I will say that Queen Elizabeth did sit side saddle in the film, so showing that parallel works in this film. There were certain costume choices that they gave Saoirse Ronan where I was like, is that accurate? Like the metal plate work that was done on her. There was one major issue that I saw with her plate work, though, and that is you could see, and this could be trying to make a point on class, but you could see the fire marks in the metalwork of her plated armor, and it's one of those things where it's like, that for a queen, really?
Well, Queen of Scotland. There was a lot in this film artistically where they were trying to show like she's more rugged and down to earth because that's more of the Scottish lifestyle. I'm not saying any of this is true, but I'm saying like that is definitely the impression that the film was trying to give. Like Saoirse Ronan won't wear traditional makeup. None of her handmaids wear traditional makeup. They wear similar clothing because there's not as strong of an emphasis on having a visual distinction between class. She has more casual hairstyles than, say, Queen Elizabeth does. They kind of try to make her the more down-to-earth one of the two.
Yeah, and like there's that scene where she's getting painted, where she literally takes the little, I don't know what you call it, the little frill thing that Queen Elizabeth wears, and she like holds it so that the portrait can look like she's of a higher class. Yeah. I thought that was interesting. And
that portrait, by the way, was a really nice prop.
Yes.
That was a really smart thing to write into the script, and the actual prop was very lovely.
And there's some really good costume, makeup, prop work done in the movie.
But it's very uneven.
Yeah.
Like, some of it's amazing, and some of it is garbage. Like, they literally have the same quill pen that I made myself when I was 8 years old after a run to Hobby Lobby. That was my same quill pen that I had when I was 8 that I spent $1 on, and I saw it in this stupid movie. Or, like, Queen Elizabeth has this necklace that is, like, the most garbage plastic. Like, plastic beading. Like, again, it literally looks like the necklace that I made for my medieval stage play when I was 11. It doesn't look like something that belongs in, like, a real Hollywood movie.
Also, like, this is another thing that I don't know about the period. I don't know about the culture of the Scots during this period. But the earrings that Saoirse Ronan were wearing, was that historically accurate? Like the multiple earrings and then the one... I think it was one earring, but it was made to look like it was multiple earrings.
I don't know specifically if that's something she actually had, but asymmetrical earrings were not unfashionable at the time. If you look at portraits of William Shakespeare, he has, like, the single gold loop pirate earring.
But, like, it's one of those things where it's like, but for somebody that high up, I get that they're trying to show the class in the costumes, but, like, a part of me, because of the inconsistencies with some of the production design of, like, things looking way too polished, makes those things stand out a lot more and makes me question everything that I'm seeing, versus if you made things look a little bit dirtier and all that kind of stuff, I wouldn't be thinking about it as much while watching the film.
Well, not doing any actual research, but just a quick peruse through Google Images while we're talking, none of her portraits seem to have that kind of earring work.
Okay.
It also doesn't show explicitly mismatched earrings, but you can only see one earring at a time. So.
Right.
Because, you know, they like to do those 3/4 profiles where you can see one ear but not the other.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that is not saying one way or another, oh, that's wrong or that's right, but just a very quick peruse through Google Images kind of shows, maybe not.
So we talked about the costumes and the makeup. What do you have to say about the hair?
I was loving all of it. I'm not going to lie. The hairstyling was the one thing that I was like, okay, on point.
Very period accurate stuff.
The hair pieces were wonderful. The accessories were wonderful. The shapes of the hair were awesome. The fact that there was explicitly a scene where you could see them undoing her hair and taking the cage out of her hair was really nice. And for the record, I thought that undressing scene was very, very wonderful. Both in the costume department, but particularly the directing department, trying to show, like, you know, the safety of sisterhood, which as a theme I don't agree with, but that was a very subtle way to start that out towards the beginning of the movie. That was a good scene.
Now, just a quick question, just because I'm not, like, super familiar with the times. Would it have been historically accurate to have, I guess you would call it a bodice that was that flat?
The flat chest was very popular at the time,
okay.
Yes. If you look at any portraits of Queen Elizabeth, she has that very, very flat chest. I mean, even in these basic portraits, you see the flat chest.
Got you. It's formed. It's formed in the outfit itself.
That very flat, very austere V shape was definitely very popular at the time.
Gotcha.
I mean, that booby thing was not super popular at the time, but the boob thing was not as prominent in this film as it is in a lot of historical pieces that take place at this time.
Because you gotta make it sexy.
You gotta make it sexy somehow. And apparently in this movie, the sexy nature was the rapiness of it all. Ugh. Okay.
That was really uncomfortable, by the way. Part of me appreciated it because, like, if you look at the times, the idea of consent is not what we see it today. But, you know, when you throw in that queer context and all that kind of stuff, it just makes it more messed up because, like, while I was watching the scene, did you have this? Because, like, while I was watching the scene, I was like, is he actually...
He's gay and doesn't want to fuck her unless he's trying to rape her. Then he can kind of get into it a little bit.
Okay, because, like, I
dude,
literally
what?
thought he was going for anal, like, in the scene.
I mean, that's where I thought it was going to, and I was like, that's going to be kind of an interesting discussion to have the next day, but okay. But no, that's not where they took it. And for the record, Saoirse Ronan, that was one of her better performances in the film, too, was her trying to be, like, stoic while also having, like, physical pains after that. I thought it was a really good physical performance. But the subject of it is very weird because, like, he's the bastard because he seduced her, and then she found out he was gay, and she's like, fuck, I wanted to marry him so I could have, like, a good sexual experience and get knocked up. So then she's kind of going after him, and he's like, dude, no, I don't want to. And she's pushing him, but of course it's a movie, so if a woman tries to push herself on a man, or if a woman explicitly rapes a man, it's funny, or it's not so bad.
I think
because we're still dealing with this shit where it's like, oh, a woman rapes a man, it's funny.
Spoiler alert for The Perks of Being a Wallflower.
And more recently, we just saw that happen on Kidding. Like, it's not rape when it's a woman with a man. Oh, God.
But no, I'm saying spoiler alerts for The Perks of Being a Wallflower. If you haven't seen it, skip ahead. But The Perks of Being a Wallflower is probably the only film that I've ever seen where female on male rape is not taken as a joke. Like, it is actually literally taken seriously.
Okay, but that's still very few and far between.
Okay.
But then it moves from that, where she's trying to push him into doing it, into, oh, well, now that I get to beat you up a little bit, now I can actually, like, sexually perform. Like, really? And there's not, like, a real good reason to put that into his character other than, let's just make him as bastardly as humanly possible. It's all just a very frustrating, because no character is given a whole lot of development in this 2.5-hour historical epic.
The movie was... Oh, it was 2 hours and 4 minutes, so...
Oh, 2 hours. Okay, but still...
I feel like this would be a better miniseries just because there's a lot to cover.
And they still didn't cover a lot of it.
They still didn't cover a lot of it, and it seems like they should have picked a later moment in the story to start.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they did skip over her entire first marriage. They kind of tried to compromise by putting it in the middle, but... Anyway, overall, yeah, this movie was very uneven and had some good moments, but overall it's just... The script was always going to be the downfall of this movie.
Now, if you have seen a better version of this story, please leave it in the comments below, because I would love to see a better take on this story.
And if you're really jonesing for, like, a really hardcore, period piece that has a lot of questionable historical issues for the sake of telling a good story, but actually does have a good story and really intriguing characters and really, really good art, then you should definitely just watch The Favorite instead. It's in theaters and it's better on every front.
Yeah, I'll definitely agree with you there.
Yeah. And also, it's a lot sexier, too. But it's definitely not a perfect film either, for sure, but... It tells a better story, and it has a much better script, so...
So, you got your umbrella ready? Alright, so, our next film that we watched was Mary Poppins Returns. Now, we did actually go back and watch the original Mary Poppins in preparation for this movie.
My personal opinion is that it does not hold up as well as people might remember. out of all of the movies to go back and revisit and like, oh, you're just being silly and ridiculous if you think there's something problematic with this. There's definitely a lot of problematic stuff going on in Mary Poppins. The Chimney Sweep song that everybody remembers very fondly is way too fucking long. It's really long.
And that musical number goes on forever. And there's so much dancing. Not a lot of variety in the dancing itself. It's just like, we jump here, we jump here. Oh, isn't it crazy? And now Mary Poppins is spinning so fast that her head just like starts, revolving in the center of the screen.
That I swear that musical number has like 5 chapters to it. It's so long. But there were definitely some problematic stuff in the writing for that. People might not remember in the Jolly Holiday song how Bert is just singing yet again about, oh, Mary Poppins, it's so nice to spend time with you. You're so perfect and you're so lovely. And being around you, I just feel so good. And her only response is a very brief verse where she sings about how it's nice to spend time with you too, because I know you wouldn't take advantage of me or push yourself on me. And it's rare to find that in a guy. Whoa, that shit got way too adult, way too fast, but also just like, do you even like Bert? Why are you making her? Oh, because he's not going to rape you? Okay. That's an awkward thing to bring up to his face in front of the children, in front of the cartoon penguins, but okay. And then there was also a lot of, like, there was definitely too much romanticizing poverty. Not romanticizing struggle, just, oh, wouldn't it be fun to be homeless and have to beg for money out of your cap? Because you could have a different career every day. One day you could be a chimney sweep. Isn't that fun? Chimney sweeps most definitely were not indentured child slaves who had to give all of their earnings to a pimp. Like, what is it with musicals and, like, glorifying child slavery from the 1900s? What is up with that? Because we had Newsies, too.
Yeah, I was just about to bring up Newsies. I was like, well, it seems like a bigger problem in Newsies, and, like, that movie's, like, way newer because it has Christian Bale in it.
But with Bert, it was definitely a big problem because he's homeless and they try to make that look cute, and then he's a chimney sweep and they try to make that look appealing. And it's like, dude, he's homeless? Like, that's not fun. And they try to make it seem like, oh, well, that's just lovely and fun. You live so easy and free if you're homeless. No, that is not what that's like. Don't try to make homelessness look cool. Just don't do that.
Well, and one of the things that I liked about the first movie was that there is one moment in the movie where they really give the poor attention. For this one moment, and that's about feeding the birds, Tuppence, the birds, and all that kind of stuff. And it, at least from my interpretation of the movie, we'll get into this with the second movie, but like at least my interpretation was that was Mary Poppins trying to tell the kids about the significance of giving to others no matter how small and insignificant they are. Like the fact that like you share your wealth around you. You share your experiences. That's what she's doing because she's not really asking for much from Mr. Banks in the movie. Like
she just wants the first Tuesday of every month off.
And yet she wants to make... We'll get into that later. But
the a lot of the musical numbers and a lot of the whimsical elements are not really as fun as, like, they might seem like. Yeah, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious was a very fun way to teach your kids that there are appropriate times to swear, but you kind of forget that that scene was really long and had, like, this whole other thing about racing horses, because that was really inappropriate to do in 1910.
And Mary Poppins can just ask the guys to politely let her win.
And it works. Yeah, there was a lot of stuff like that. But Julie Andrews is what makes that movie survive to this day, because her performance is so wonderful. Her singing obviously is on point, her dancing is wonderful, but just her entire countenance is just so pleasant, and she really walked that nice line of not appearing fake cheerful, because she was always like very blunt and she would always speak her mind very easily, and with a lesser actress she could come off as like really snarky, but she doesn't. You know, she really was that perfect, like practically perfect in every way to a T. She was so wonderful in that film.
And it carries on into The Sound of Music, which is another like great performance by her. Not a huge fan of that movie, but like I have no qualms against her as an actress in that movie.
Yeah, the dad was actually a really good performer. As much as certain scenes dragged on, the editing on other scenes was pretty tight, so the pacing isn't so terrible for a lot of it, but sometimes it just goes on too much.
They could have shaved at least a good 40 minutes of the movie.
Maybe not 40, I was going to say maybe 15.
Okay.
But then you have things like Bert doing the Dora the Explorer speeches into the camera, which is a little insufferable nowadays. And you've got the ditzy suffragette mom that's just kind of obnoxious. But
which, by the way, we're going to talk about the suffragette movement for only one song, and then just like promptly forget about it.
Well, it's at the beginning too, but it's this thing of like, she wants to do it, but
we're just gonna attach it onto the kite.
Well, no, she wants to do it, but then like she's trying to hide it from her husband. But again, kind of romanticizing, like, oh, it was so exciting! All of my girlfriends went to jail because this is what we do for fun. Oh God, why? Why did you write that, Disney? Anyway, but the special effects were really, really amazing. The yellow screen effects really, really hold up.
And that was only used for Disney, right?
Disney was the only company that had the right to that technology and that equipment, and they did not use it for very many movies, but it looks phenomenal in Mary Poppins. The special effects really, really, really hold up. The art is really lovely. It was a fairly effective period piece, considering that it was made in the 60s and it took place in 1910. You know, like, it was pretty alright on that front.
Yeah. So now we have Mary Poppins Returns, and
which I was dreading because I've hated all of these Disney reboots, revamps, live-action adaptations, and then this was the very best of the bunch by a lot, and was actually quite good in most respects.
Well, I think the thing that really makes this movie succeed is emulate the first movie that you have, but be your own movie.
Well, and also kind of subtly fix a lot of the problems you had with that first movie. Like, there was a very nice pivot away from indentured child servants into, hey, let's talk about, like, Lumineers. Because that was actually a job for adult men to do. And also, let's talk about the fact that, like, you know, they kind of need a labor union. Like, it wasn't all sunshine and roses, but he's a good person so he can make the best of it. That's kind of a nicer way to go about it. And they didn't beat you over the head with it too much. Not nearly as much as they did with Votes for Women, Step in Time. Like, it was actually a lot more subtle than that.
Though
It
is weird that Disney is mentioning this in 2 films this year, both with the same costume designer, which I think is kind of interesting.
No. Mary Poppins Returns is Sandy Powell, and Goodbye Christopher Robin was Jenny Beavan. So, no. They are both amazing costume designers, and they are both Oscar darlings, but they are not the same person.
Who was I thinking was the same person? Like, what other work were they doing?
I think that you got confused because I said that when Oscar season rolls around, I'm going to be very conflicted because I'm pretty sure they're both going to be nominated, and I'm not going to know who to root for because I love them both. But they're not the same person.
Yeah, quite. Given the fact that Christopher Robin kind of like fell into obscurity at this point, I think Mary Poppins has a much better chance of being nominated.
Honestly, now that I've seen the movie, Jenny Beavan's costumes were better. It did also look like they recycled a lot of the same sets from Goodbye Christopher Robin for the Mary Poppins Returns, but that's setting that aside.
I think that's okay.
It's
to a certain
okay.
extent.
No, it's okay. It was just kind of funny. I was having a little bit of deja vu. I was like, oh yeah, I saw the double-decker bus 6 months ago. And that other Disney movie that tries to pretend that it's, a proletariat film while upholding the very problematic elements of capitalism.
Yeah. We'll get into that in a minute. One thing that I will say is this movie had what I think is severely lacking in a lot of musicals, and that is...
Lin-Manuel Miranda?
Yes.
Just put him in everything, please!
Well, I was going to say a sense of musical timing, like, oh, this is the right moment to have a song. Because there's so many musicals that come out now where it's like the music actually comes right after the moment where the song should have been.
No, Rob Marshall was very good about that in Chicago.
Now, I will say, the fact that this is being Mary Poppins, there were a couple moments where it was like, Rob Marshall,
way too much like
why
Chicago.
are you literally paying homage to your other movie and, like, changing Mary Poppins to have that, like, rasp?
Yeah, that was so obnoxious.
It was
that
like,
was so annoying. It's
Mary
like, no, that's not right. You don't do that
Why
in
did
this
you
movie.
turn Mary Poppins into Catherine Zeta-Jones?
Why did you literally do that? Okay, yeah. Can we just, like, break into this while we're talking about it? The supercalifragilisticexpialidocious of this movie is called Cover Is Not the Book. And this musical number had many problems. Number one is that you did not need to put a Chicago number into a Mary Poppins movie. You absolutely broke the style of, like, the musical style you were trying to go for the rest of the movie. In the song that came before this, where they're going to the music hall, you tried to put in this very Chicago, like, raspy, deep-throated kind of thing that works in Chicago, but definitely did not work here, because it is not a style that's utilized throughout the film. But then, and you emulated the choreography, like, down to a T from, like, it was literally, just watching it was literally like watching a mashup of Can't Do It Alone and the Honey Time Rag from the very end, where they had those machine guns instead they have umbrellas, but it's very similar style. But most importantly, I'm gonna say this, and I rarely say this, but that was too adult to put in a kid's movie. And there's a very explicit reason why I say this. There's a lot of, like, innuendo and a lot of stuff that's in that song, and you should never put something in a movie that you would not be okay with a younger child saying out loud. Especially because this movie is aimed for younger children. There are lessons in this movie like, oh, you need to learn that it's fun to take a bath. It's definitely aimed for a much younger audience. This is not like trying to play up to an older crowd. So if you're not okay with a 3-year-old who needs to learn the lesson of how to bathe, saying all she was wearing was 2 feathers and a branch of leaves, while making specific graphic motions over their genitals, don't put that in your movie then, because kids will emulate that stuff. I know when I was 1 year old, when I was 1 to 2 years old, I was singing every Mary Poppins song, and there's no way 1 to 2 year olds are not going to be singing the lyrics to this song. And it's not just me, I promise you. My mom, who used to teach a co-op of 3-year-olds, was kind of shocked when she heard a 3-year-old say, bow chicka bow wow, because that's obviously associated with pornos. The reason why he said that, I promise you this is how he knows that, is because the song Brick House is featured in the Muppets in Space movie. He watched that movie a couple of times. Brick House is a catchy song. He's just emulating the song, bow chicka bow wow. Okay, like, in the kid's mind, it's innocent, but don't put stuff in the songs in your movies that you'd be uncomfortable with 3-year-olds replicating, because they will do it. That will totally happen.
I get what you're saying, but in defense of the movie, I will say that this movie is PG, not G, and parental guidance is suggested. One thing that I will say is I'm getting a little sick and tired of us toning down movies to the point where it's hard for me as an adult to watch them.
I definitely agree with that.
I do like a little bit of adult thrown into Disney, and this was actually nice for me. Like, I did actually kind of like that, because it was like, oh, You can still do it, Disney.
No, you can do jokes. You can do double entendres. That's not that bad. And if you want to talk about serious life issues, I have no problem with doing that because kids have to deal with that at all ages. But when you have like an entire verse about a woman who runs around naked and you literally have Mary Poppins and Bert Jr. putting their hands over their boobs and their like vaginas, it's kind of like, children will go home and do that. Like, they're 100% gonna get this on DVD and emulate that at home and emulate that at school.
I don't know. Heaven forbid they watch any other musical. I mean, like, musicals are, like, the worst when it comes to, like, raunchiness that kids will, like...
Maybe adult musicals, but not Disney musicals.
Okay. But that being said, another thing that I thought was weird was this has been a problem with some of the other movies that we've seen this year, but like really throwing the woman in the refrigerator. Like, oh yeah, I had a whole wife.
That's so annoying.
I had a whole wife, but we want to figure out a way to have the two kids from the original Mary Poppins together in a way that doesn't.
There's not going to be any jokes about them sleeping together.
Right. Even though, like, you still kind of can with, like, some of the positioning that they make in the movie. That being said, they wanted to throw them in together and they thought, like, oh, well, if he had a wife that died, and, that's how we'll throw it in. But, like, it feels so awkward to do that because you don't have a picture of her, which, like... What?
And there's no defining features of her except for apparently she married a man-child and she was the only person who could keep their family going because she took care of everything, apparently. Which is really weird and awkward, but like that's her only characteristic. Well, and
that gets into the problem like Mary Poppins in modern times of like, oh, well, men are just incompetent of taking care of children, so of course they need a nanny.
Or themselves, or their jobs, or their house.
Yeah, it was one of those things while, like, watching the movie, and, like, it was like, oh, the place is a mess, and all that kind of stuff, and it was like, God damn, George, did you not learn... I'm sorry, what was his name? Michael. God damn it, Michael. Did you not learn anything from Mary Poppins, like, growing up? Like,
apparently the kids are just tiny adults now because he can't figure out how to pick up the slack once his wife died. Like, you still have to have... Like, you had the nicer, more emotionally supportive dad than what they had in the original film, but you can't have a single dad without making him totally fucking incompetent. You just can't do it in a Disney movie.
Yeah,
we finally got to the point where we had any parents that were actually together and both still alive. Like, we finally got there. We finally got to the point where, like, once you did that, you even had a mom who had a couple of speaking lines. Like, dude, progress. We're finally back to where we were in Sleeping Beauty. Finally, we got there. And then you had to turn around and be like, no, we're going to kill the mom and the dad's incompetent. Fuck it.
Well, we had it in the original one. I mean, even though, like...
Both of the parents were alive.
Yeah.
And to be fair, the dad wasn't incompetent. The dad was just kind of a stick up his butt. He needed to discover his inner child or whatever.
That being said, I did really like the use of music in the movie. I think that the songs were well performed for, like, well... I will say, for today's standards, the songs are very well done and performed and all that kind of stuff. Because,
and they don't overstay their welcome, which is nice.
And, after seeing stuff like La La Land and, like, a lot of modern musicals, it was like a breath of fresh air. It was like, holy shit, you can still do a musical like this.
Oh,
so why...
This has been a year full of musicals, but, like, really stylistically odd ones, like... We haven't really had musicals like Blind Spotting and The Ballad of Buster Scruggs before. I mean, we have, but not so many in 1 year.
Yeah, and then, like, Anna and the Apocalypse, we saw, and there was much to be desired in that movie. Mm. A lot having to do with timing
it was a very
and
Glee Club High School Musical style musical. Which is
and
unfortunate, I think the people involved in that were more talented than that, but they didn't write the thing.
This movie felt like, it had life and the songs moved the story forward. And that's like one of the big issues that I've been having with musicals. And I've discussed with you almost to the point where I'm just like, well, I guess I just don't like musicals anymore because they all have this issue.
No, the musicals were all good. A lot of the lessons were actually pretty good lessons in general. I think that the bathtub scene was actually a really nice scene. I thought the thing of teaching them don't judge a book by its cover, don't be prejudgmental, and also pick up a book every once in a while, read. Those are nice things to teach kids. One of the more confusing one was just kind of be accepting of the fact that women are gonna go entirely crazy once a month.
Oh yeah, a little topsy turvy there.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, it's a musical, and we gotta have Meryl Streep.
Meryl Streep's gotta be in it because she's clearly a musical star now that she's done Into the Woods.
Well, and Mamma Mia.
Yeah.
Which came out this year as well.
That was a very bizarre lesson to try to teach children, but also if you're going to teach kids about periods, why is that the way you're going to go about it? Just just don't do that.
All right, you got to explain it because I'm sure there are a lot of people going wait, periods, what?
Yeah, because there's a musical number where they go to visit Mary Poppins' cousin, and Mary Poppins realizes, oh, whoops, we're going to visit her on the second Wednesday of the month, because every second Wednesday of the month, inexplicably, her cousin, Topsy-Turvy, goes... Topsy-Turtle is the way she describes it, where her whole world goes upside down, and she just has no control over her own faculties, and everything she does is entirely opposite of what she means to do, and she can't, pull herself together at all. And, at the end, they're like, oh, you just have to, adjust your point of view, which is a nice, all genders inclusive message, but that's kind of tacked on in, the final couple lines of a rather long musical number of how on the second Wednesday of every month she loses her damn mind and ability to do anything in her life. Just leave her alone.
And, at first, before that was presented, I thought it was... Oh, Mary Poppins, what a bitch. You want every Tuesday off.
No. And she's only ever said she wants the second Tuesday of every month off.
Yeah,
she wants 1 day a month off. So she can have 1 day a month off.
So, yeah, so she wants that, and then she's trying to make this chick work on the one Wednesday.
Oh, that's right.
So it was What fucking double standards, Mary Poppins?
The porcelain bowl is still going to be broke tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly.
Although, in Topsy-Turvy's defense, the broken porcelain bowl is still going to be broken tomorrow. Just because she drops it off today doesn't mean you have to fix it.
Yeah.
You can wait till tomorrow. It'll still be there, I guess, but anyway.
Well, you don't have to worry about things being broken because Mary Poppins exists.
Yeah. But
I still thought that was cute.
No, besides
the
that...
little ribbon and all that kind of stuff. I thought it was cute. Whatever.
Yeah, all the musical numbers were really good. The Lumineers number was especially excellent. I think a lot of the changes that they made were subtle and in general were stronger changes, but there are a couple problems with the movie. Number one is, Emily Blunt clearly put a lot of work in. She's not like a Gal Gadot or an Emma Stone where she's wholly undeserving. She clearly put in a lot of work, and she does an alright job. But she is no Julie Andrews, and she is hardly practically perfect in every way because more than anybody, she kind of reminded me of Christian Bale's Batman and the Christopher Nolan movies, where on her own, she's fine enough, but when you're in an ensemble scene and they have to break everything up so Mary Poppins didn't have her moment, I'm always like, do you have to? We were having a good time. Why? And this is a shame because Emily Blunt clearly tried very hard, but she just was not the heart and soul of this movie the way Julie Andrews was.
I've been hearing like people talking about like she'll be nominated for an Oscar and all.
Well,
this
she
stuff
wasn't terrible.
Yeah.
She wasn't anywhere close to Lin-Manuel Miranda's level. Like, he outshone her from beginning to end of this movie. He was just so wonderful to be around. And ending the movie with Angela Lansbury, yes, A+. Always put Angela Lansbury in your movie if you can. Just always do it.
Even though
but
that
they
scene
really
was...
did kind of upstage... they really did upstage Emily Blunt in a way that Julie Andrews was actually trying really hard not to do by not being in this movie and going and being an Aquaman as a sea monster instead.
Though it was so weird that they did that, because it was like, okay, so you had Dick Van Dyke come back, and
he was great in his little cameo. That was fun.
Even though he died in the first one, and they tried to like write that off. But anyways, that being said, it was really weird that, you know, Angela Lansbury pops up, because you know that scene was specifically written for Julie Andrews.
And then Julie Andrews said...
Especially with the handing off of
the balloon from one Mary Poppins to another. Yeah, but at the same time, like, Angela Lansbury's great.
Yeah.
And then the other big thing in this movie is... they made a lot of mistakes writing the climax for this movie, because they made several big problems with just one move. And the big problem with the climax is that they're like afraid of losing the house the whole time, but they can't find their shares in the bank, and then they find the shares. And then they find out, oh, well, you don't even need to use the shares because you took your tuppence, and instead of giving it to the bird woman to feed the birds like you wanted to, you went and you put it in the bank, and that gave you such a great you created so much interest from doing that it pays off all of your debt, and you don't even have to touch your shares. Isn't that amazing? And there are so many problems with that. Like, that fucks up all of the movies on so many different levels.
Well, not even that. The fucking guy stole his tuppence and did it for him. He had no agency in doing that.
But then he comes out like the good guy saying like, oh, by the way, isn't it a great thing that I did that? Because now you have all this money. It's a much smarter idea to put your money in the government, put it in a bank account, instead of giving it to the poor. Because
right.
It's not a Disney movie if it doesn't shit all over your childhood in some way, and if it doesn't try to convince you that capitalism is A+.
Well, yeah, and that's one of those frustrating things, because, at least to me, like, so the Feed the Bird scene is literally my favorite scene in the original Mary Poppins. It's like the one time where you get like this really scraggly old woman who's like filthy feeding pigeons, and I'm just like, this is ballsy. Probably one of the ballsiest moves Disney has ever done. Mm-hmm. To show somebody in that light and actually show it in a way that it's like, see, this person means something. It's not trying to say like, oh wow, look at this person's life like they're doing with Bert. It's like, see, this person is important. And by changing that in this movie, it essentially shits on that entire scene. It shits on the very idea of the bird lady, who you do see in the very beginning of the movie. That's it.
She's not important enough to bring back.
I was really disappointed that plot line didn't evolve in some way. Because, I mean, you saw me, like, watching the original, I had this theory that, like, oh, Bert, you know, actually has, like, the alternate personality, which is the banker, you know, since played by the same actor, and Mary Poppins is the bird lady. Mm-hmm. But they didn't go there, which... Yeah, crazy genie theory, like with Aladdin and the Merchant, which actually was confirmed. I know that that's a stretch, but I do think that having an understanding and respect or sympathy for the poor is a very important message to put in a film, especially a film about wealth. And like in this movie itself, they, you know... Michael
it's all
selfish. Is in debt and all this kind of stuff, and they have the nicest house. Granted, he inherited it. I get it. Whatever. But, like, he is living in wealth. There isn't a sense of poverty except, like, he's going to lose the house. They never explicitly say where they're going, except, like, later they do.
They're going to the sister's flat, which if the sister has a flat, that's going to be a lot more squished. But they don't show what that reality would look like in any sort of negative light. But, I mean, to be fair to the movie, his wife died the year before, like, within a year. It's been less than a year. And he's working as a part-time accountant and as a struggling artist. And he burned through all of their wealth and he's about to lose the house.
I definitely have to plug film theory because, like...
That's the bigger part of the problem is why are you teaching people that it's more important to put their money in a bank account and try to accrue interest as opposed to giving their money to the poor or putting it in themselves when we have such a long fucking history of being screwed over by the government out of our own money that we set aside for ourselves. And because explicitly that tuppence did not go anywhere. That tuppence did not accrue any interest no matter what you did with it. It doesn't matter if it sat there and accrued interest. It doesn't matter if you put it into investments. It doesn't matter if you put it into war bonds. That shit did not come back to you. And that shit definitely did not make you well over £200,000 like their stocks or their shares in the bank did. Like, that is such bullshit. That literally never would have happened. Watch that film theory video. It's really, really interesting. Yeah. And it's good that he does that video work for this movie.
So this movie definitely tries to be Wizard of Oz, which is that there are some characters that in the fantasy world are other characters. Mm-hmm. But they're still essentially the same character. Like, the big banker is the wolf. One thing that I did like about when you're introduced to the wolf is it raised stakes in the fantasy, which I thought was really cool. Because that was one time where it's like, oh shit, like, in Mary Poppins, like, you thought the fantasy, was just going to be like, la 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 la, and nothing serious was going to happen. And this movie was like, oh no, wait, there's danger in the fantasy itself as well.
Well, that's what makes this movie so much better than the original, is that in the original, a lot of it is just based on whimsy, whereas in this one, it has a much darker edge because it's based around children worrying over real-life problems in their real world that actually affect them. And that permeates in their fantasy escapism because they can take on their parents' stress and anxieties in ways that you don't expect when they're put under a harsh environment like that. That is something that's been coming out more in children's entertainment that needs to come out even more. Because that's something that's really fantastic for children to see and empathize with, but also that's important for parents to realize that stuff that happens in their lives affects their kids.
Yeah, I think two great recent examples are Inside Out, that's coming from like Disney and Pixar, but also Kubo and the Two Strings, which is a lot more complicated. Yeah, the Lego movie does a good job. And that also gets into like the idea of man-child's relationship with his children as well.
Mm-hmm, yeah. And it was kind of like some interesting stuff with like, how do you deal with death? How do you deal with the problems that grown-ups can't seem to solve, I think that there's a lot more for little kids to pick up and learn besides just, euphemisms for nudity.
You are so hung up on that.
I'm not that hung up on it, but while I was thinking of it, all I could think of is if I was 3 and I was doing this, I would get in trouble. So, but there were more important things than that in this movie that I thought were really awesome. And then also, even though they had the whole thing with the tuppence, they were, like, Manuel Miranda was able to do his little miniature homage to Les Mis in a really nice way, which I liked. They rewrote the suffragette character to be Jane grown up. She's working for union rights, like equality for laborers, which is awesome. A, she's a lot more intelligent. B, she's working for a really great cause that affects a bunch of people. C, it actually plays into the storyline. And it kind of goes the opposite of this idea of romanticizing poverty the way the first film does. Mm-hmm. It's more of, hey, this is a real issue and we actually need to do something about it. but in a fun way. It doesn't hit you over the head with it. But at the end of the Lumineers piece, all of these people who went to her rally to fight for the equality of laborers are all raucously running down the street with lit torches. And it was so awesome. Was such a good moment.
Yeah, it was like all of a sudden it turned into,
so awesome.
It turned into the Boris Karloff Frankenstein there.
It really did. Down with the bourgeoisie. It was so awesome. I love that moment. I love that kind of snuck in under the radar because it just seems like, oh, this is a fun way to enter a musical number and not a like, hey, we're really serious. We're going to riot for our rights to, fair and equal payment for our work.
Yeah.
That was awesome. That was probably one of my favorite moments in a film in 2019 or 2018. That was cool. And they kind of did another Les Mis reference with the ladders at the wall. It kind of reminded me of like scaling the walls in the big fight scenes.
Yeah, which
it was nice.
Of course, we both talked about the fact that like Mary Poppins just comes off as a bitch in that scene.
Oh, she's such a bitch in that scene.
Since she could have just,
she could have done it herself easily.
Exactly.
But not only could she have done it herself easily, she's sitting there making fun of the fact that they're working their butts off and they can't do it as easily as she can with her magic powers.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will say though, the art department did really miffle me a lot in this movie.
Miffle you? I actually kind of liked it.
A lot of the art really miffled me. I love Sandy Powell's body of work, and I especially really, really loved her hand-drawn outfits in the China world. I really, really loved that idea and that aesthetic so much. It's exactly the kind of thing I really would like to do in a movie. It was very Méliès. It was very Tim Burton's Hansel and Gretel in a good way. I know that's not a good movie, but I love the aesthetic of that movie, and it was a really beautiful set of costumes. But I really was not a fan of the way it was color graded. I wasn't a fan of the way that it was filmed. Everything had this contemporary problem. It was very 2005 Peter Jackson's King Kong, where everything was just too sleek and too modern looking. But also, like...
I kind of... Okay, I kind of liked it just because, like, I'm so used to, like, all these movies, like, trying to look gray.
I thought it looked too gray still, but...
But, like, when they went into the fantasy, there was, like, a clear distinction.
There was a clear distinction, which was nice. There was some good color grading. The more imaginative characters are wearing brighter colors versus the more, we're adults and we lost our inner child, we're wearing gray, darker colors. Like, some of the color grading was alright, but...
Like, that first, like, bathtub sequence, I really like the colors in that sequence.
I liked a lot of the animation work, but I was... Okay, all of the garments were very well constructed, but the patterns, oh my god, all the patterns and all the clashing colors, the whole movie, jeez. It was like being in Whoville. It was just too much. It was just... it was really bothersome to me, and there were a few props and pieces where it was just kind of like, really? You couldn't make that look like the original movie? Like her carpet bag and her umbrella were, like, actually not the same as they were in the original movie. Like, the kite is exactly the same, but her carpet bag is going to be different? It's like the little polka dot lining. It was too much.
And also her hairstyle is going to be like more modern or something.
Yeah.
Well, like not like more modern, but like
very
more modern to the time.
No, the makeup and hairstyling was very modern. They were not using period appropriate techniques and color, which in general, it's not a hard and fast rule. It doesn't have to be slavishly accurate to the time, because unlike the first one, they don't really say the exact time. I was kind of guesstimating it's been about 25 years, so maybe like 1935. But I'm not a historical expert in English history, obviously. I'm not quite sure if that's totally true. But like, it kind of has to feel like it is of the time. Like, The original Mary Poppins came out in 1963 or 1964, but it took place in 1910. And it kind of just felt like it took place in 1910. It wasn't slavishly accurate, but it had the feeling and the vibe, and that was fine. And this movie was, A, too modern, and B, almost a little too similar, which is hard to explain, but, Jack just looks way too much like Bert to the point where it's a little distracting. It's hard to
And it's we know that that's what they're going for, but, come on. It's a new
just
character.
It's really difficult to distinguish him as a separate character from Bert in his own right, even though he is. But it just... There was a lot of stuff in the art department where they had their vision and they went with it. I just fundamentally didn't agree with it.
Yeah. So, overall, I really enjoyed it. While there are some significant problems, like the whole Tuppence thing, that's one thing, two Tuppence that I cannot forgive the movie for. That being said, I did actually enjoy it a lot. Surprisingly, I enjoyed it a lot more than Mary Queen of Scots, and I was not expecting that. I was expecting to like Mary Queen of Scots a lot more than I did Mary Poppins.
Yeah, I definitely agree. This is definitely I could have some appreciation for Maleficent, but Maleficent was not a good movie by any stretch of the imagination. Out of all of the movies that have come out of this new Disney wave of remake / rehash / reboot / quote-unquote live-action nonsense, this is the only good one in the bunch as far as I'm concerned. This is literally the only one we're seeing. And it's also surprisingly better than the original. I actually do think that it was a good remake in that it is true to the spirit of the original, with the exception of the Thomas thing, which totally shits on the spirit of the original, but except for that, it's very true to the spirit of the original while kind of pivoting and fixing some minor things and making some improvements and kind of trying to do more to be more relatable to kids nowadays,
So, what did you guys think of your Christmas? Did you have a good Christmas? We had a good Christmas. We enjoyed the films that we saw, and we want to wish you a very Merry Christmas.